Today we're going to be talking about the spark plugs on Subarus, Porsches, and Ferraris, basically any engine where the cylinders lie flat. Now, there's a really common misconception that to change these or to access these, you have to pull the engine out of the engine bay and then go about doing your thing. However, I'm going to show you today that is not only not the case, but I'm going to show you the exact tactic that I've been using on Subarus for years to not only get the spark plugs out, but to change them really easily, really simple, and it usually doesn't even take me more than an hour or two. So I've been doing this for a while. I did it on a Subaru WRX for the longest time. Behind me with the hood open is a 2014 Subaru BRZ. And today on this car, I'm going to be giving you an animation that shows the exact tactic that I'm using, and then I'm going to show you it in action and it working. Now this tactic will also work for Porsche and Ferrari, like I said. However, Porsche, it's not as required because the engines are a little bit easier to access. And if you have a Ferrari, I'm just going to assume that you're probably paying somebody to do this. And if you own one of these cars that is going to require this at any point, even if you don't have to change your spark plugs and you clicked on this video, I would advise just watching it, just seeing the tactic to how it could be done without lifting the engine, because when the time comes that you have to do it, you can remember this video and it will be very helpful to you. So with that being said, let's get on, and I'm going to be showing you the tools needed and then an animation showing what I'm going to be doing, just so that it's a little bit easier to see because there's not a lot of room in the engine bay to see it. Then we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to get it done. Now, getting into the tools needed to complete this task, the first is going to be some kind of bright light that allows you to see deep into the engine bay, then a 3/8 inch drive 3-inch extension, followed by a 3/8 inch drive 10-inch extension. This is going to allow us to access deep spots. These will have a 12mm deep well socket, as well as a 14mm deep well socket, both 3/8 inch drive to connect to your extensions. This will be followed by your replacement spark plugs, which is kind of the entire point here. Then a 1/4 inch drive 10mm socket, a magnet one, which will save you a lot of frustration and pain as you do this job, a 1/4 inch drive ratchet, which we used with the 10mm socket just to gain access to the spark plugs, not to actually remove them. That'll be done with the 3/8 inch drive ratchet, which will be used for the entire spark plug process with your extensions and your deep well sockets. Now, about half of these tools are specific to my vehicle, which once again is a 2014 Subaru BRZ. If you're just doing this on any flat cylinder configuration engine, I'm going to circle right now all of the critical components. These are the tools that you're going to need pretty much across the board, no matter the vehicle, as long as the engine is flat cylinder oriented, and the rest of them are just specific to getting junk out of the way to access the spark plugs on my specific vehicle. So now we're going to be hopping over into a quick animation of the strategy that we're going to be using to change the spark plugs. It's really hard to film the spark plug kind of area in the engine bay from above, and it makes it very difficult to understand what's actually going on. So I'm doing this just to illustrate the strategy that I'm using before we go ahead and do it. So as you can see, we have our entire flat cylinder engine here with our coil pack, our spark plug, our combustion chamber, our piston, our connecting rod, crankshaft, and the engine block. This is just a front view of any kind of flat cylinder oriented engine. So we're basically going to be taking this engine and we're just going to look at one side because it is the same on both sides. The process is exactly the same. So the first thing that we're going to do is remove the coil pack. This usually just comes off by hand. It's held on by a bolt and then it'll slide out. We're going to put that to the side. Then we're going to take our 14mm deep well socket and just kind of throw it into the hole. It doesn't have to go on the spark plug or anything yet. Just throw it in there. Then take your 3-inch extension and throw that in there, and at this point you're going to want to push it in just to get it to snap into place. Then once it does that, it'll be sticking out just enough that you can get your 3/8 drive ratchet on there, and that's going to allow us to loosen the spark plug, which will pull everything out a little bit by loosening it. Now it's quite a lot of threads, so be patient with it, and it might take a bit, but it'll eventually come out. Following this, you're going to take your ratchet back out. Then you're going to have to use both of your hands. One hand is going to pull on the extension. The other is going to apply pressure on the back of the deep well socket to get them to separate. And then once they separate, this is where the magnet wand comes into play. We're going to use that to fish the 3-inch extension back up out of the engine bay. You're going to take your magnet wand, put it back down, and this will attract your 14mm deep well socket, which will you also pull out of the engine bay. Then you put the magnet wand down there one more time, and at this point you might have to really kind of push it into the hole a little bit. And what this will do is it'll attract the spark plug because the back ends of them are actually magnetic, and then that will allow us to fish the spark plug out of the engine bay. So now we're pretty much just going to do the same thing but in reverse to get the spark plug back in. So we're going to use our magnet wand to fish it into the hole. You definitely want to use the magnet wand here because if you drop the spark plug down into the engine bay, it can be a real pain to recover. And then from there, you're going to take that out. You take your 14 millimeter deep well socket and you're going to throw it into the hole, and this will push the spark plug a little bit further in. Don't worry about where it's seated just yet. Just get both of them in there in that orientation. Then we're going to take our 3-inch extension again, and you're going to push that in until it clicks into place. Usually at this point, it'll be just about ready to start threading in. So then we'll take our ratchet and attach it onto the end. And I would advise don't attach it all the way because it can be really hard to get off. So just put it into the extension enough that you can turn it. And from here, we're going to screw the spark plug into place. Then you can take your ratchet out, and then it's going to be the exact same process where you take 2 hands, pull the extension out with one, take the other and push onto the deep well to get them to separate. Once they separate, take your magnet wand, put it down there, and that's going to allow you to fish out your 3-inch extension. Then we're going to take our magnet wand, put it back down there. This will attract the 14 millimeter deep well socket, which we can then pull out of there. And then you're pretty much left with a replaced spark plug. At that point, you can take the coil pack and put it back into place, and it should seat down onto the new spark plug. And then as you can see, we have our entire engine here. One side's replaced, the other's not. It'll be the exact same process for all 4 of them. And this is pretty much the exact tactic that we're going to be using to change the spark plugs on any flat plane engine. So getting into the specific tactics to do this on a Subaru BRZ 86 FRS, first thing we're going to do on the driver's side is we're going to need to take off this fuel injector cover. Now it's bolted down with 2 12mm bolts, and this is what our deep well 12mm socket will be used for. There's literally just 2 of them, and then we need to pop this thing out because it will give us more space to access the coil packs and eventually the spark plugs. So like I said, we're going to take our 12mm deep well socket, connect it to our 10-inch extension, and then connect that to the ratchet. And this will make it pretty easy to get both of those bolts off and eventually get the fuel injector cover off. Now we're starting with the driver's side because it is the more difficult of the 2, so I figured I'd get it out of the way. So as you can see, we're basically just going to take both of these off. And here you're going to want to also use the magnet wand in conjunction with this to avoid the bolts falling down into the engine bay, as that could be a real hassle to try and fish them out after you do this. So once you have both of them out and you want to take the injector cover off, I realized that it was going to be kind of hard to do with this bar in the way, so you need to take this kind of strut tower brace off. It's 4 12mm bolts. I just used the exact same ratchet setup, and this allows me to pretty much just pull this off and then have access to the fuel injector cover. Now, the fuel injector cover, like I said, takes a lot of wiggling to get out. You do need to actually fight with it quite a bit, but be careful not to, sever any of the fuel lines that are around it, because they're all pretty critical to your engine's basic function, really. But just be patient with it. You got to wiggle it around a lot. Don't get aggressive with it. Don't yank on it. Don't pull out anything super hard. And eventually, by kind of finessing it and wiggling it through all of these hoses and lines, it eventually will pop out, as you see there. And then we can basically set that aside for now. Now what we're going to be doing here is, this is actually the gap where the coil packs and spark plugs will be on the left. I'm taking my 10mm 1/4-inch drive socket with the 1/4-inch drive ratchet, and I'm using this to get the bolt of the coil packs off. Now each coil pack has one 10mm bolt that you have to undo to allow the coil pack to slide out. And it is a bit of a pain. They're kind of hard to access, and it might take a few tries to get the ratchet to even lock onto the bolt. My advice would be get the ratchet on there and initially break it loose. Then after that, you're probably going to want to loosen it with your fingers and use the magnet wand to fish it out and avoid dropping it. This is a very kind of tedious thing, but eventually you can get the coil pack out, as you see there. It's basically just one bolt and then it'll slide right out. You do have to unplug it from the harness, but it's really, you can see that harness right there. It's really basic, it comes right off. Then what I had done is I threw the deep well and the extension into the hole, and you can see it sticks out just enough right there for me to eventually get my ratchet down there and undo it. And then later on, I'm pulling the spark plug out with the magnet wand using the same tactic as in the animation. So then we're going to take our new spark plug here. A lot of them have a cover that you got to remove and take off. Make sure not to leave that on, otherwise your engine will misfire, it will not work. So then what we're doing is taking that and fishing it down into the hole. And like I said, the magnet wand could be of great assistance here to prevent dropping it, but I felt pretty comfortable about getting this one in there without it. So I basically just kind of threw it down in there, and make sure that the end that has the bent tip that is actually going to be sparking is facing inwards. Make sure not to put it in backwards. I don't even think you can actually install it and screw it in backwards. I don't think it'll let you. but just be careful on that. So then what I'm doing is I'm taking the 14mm deep well and throwing that into the hole. This is basically the exact same thing that we saw in the animation. Now I'm just actually doing it, but you can see how difficult it is to tell what I'm doing based on the limited space that I am working with, and that's why I did the animation in the first place. So now that that's down there, we're taking our 3-inch extension. We're going to pop that down in there. And getting it to click can actually be pretty hard, so it takes me a few tries here. I have to use both my hands to kind of press it in and try and get it to click into the 14mm deep well socket. But eventually, once it does, we're able to get our ratchet down there and actually tighten the new spark plug down. You want to torque it to about 12 to 15 pound-feet of torque, which is not a lot. It doesn't take a lot. Once it just starts to feel like it's snug, you're probably good. You don't need to actually get a torque wrench on there. I actually wasn't even able to. I tried. But the other kind of piece of advice here would be tighten it by hand like I had done there, and then use the ratchet once you can no longer tighten it by hand, just because the ratchet can be hard to get on there. And don't press it in all the way onto the extension, as it'll be pretty hard to get off. So I'm just trying to get it to be in there just enough that I can turn it, and this might take a few tries. You just got to be the whole thing. You have to be very patient with, take your time, and understand that it's going to be tedious and take a while, but eventually you'll get it. This here was me tightening the spark plug down with the ratchet, and it'll only be a little bit at a time. It does take a bit. Like I said, there's a lot of threads on there, so it takes a while to get the entire thing to thread down. But as with everything in this job, you just have to be patient and persistent with it. And if it's getting frustrating and you're struggling, walk away for 10 minutes, come back and try it again, and a lot of times you'll find success through doing that. So now that that's all tightened down, this is the process that I described. We're going to use our two hands to separate the extension from the deep well socket. I have one hand, it's actually the hand on the right. I'm using my index finger to press up against the back edge of the deep well socket, and I'm using my left hand to pull on the extension. This will get them to separate. They'll actually pop apart. It might take a few tries. This is probably the hardest part of this entire process, I would say, but once these two pieces are separated, it is actually pretty easy to work with. So once they pop apart, you can see here I got the 3-inch extension out on the right side of the screen. Then from there, we could take our magnet wand and put it down there to try and get the deep well socket. And I found that a lot of times with this specific car, if you just shorten the magnet wand, like do not extend it, and put it down there, as you'll see me do now. So I'm shortening it, putting it down there, and then trying to get it angled into the spark plug hole. A lot of the time when you do that, it makes it a bit easier to actually access it, and it'll get that magnet a bit deeper in there and give you a better chance of getting the extension out. So eventually the magnetism connects it, and I was able to pull out my deep well socket, and then we basically have an installed spark plug. You pretty much just need to put the coil pack back in, undo everything that you did, including the injector cover and the strut tower brace, and then you're pretty much good on that side. So for the passenger side, it's pretty much the exact same story. Once you've done the driver's side, you'll understand the entire process of doing these spark plugs. The only thing that is different is the stuff that you have to remove to access them. And in this case, it is your fuel injector driver. It is held in by 3 10mm bolts, so I'm using the same setup I used to get the coil pack screws out to remove this injector driver. And you can even see I have blue duct tape on my wrist because of how cut up I was getting, and I started to bleed on my wrist. So maybe gloves would be warranted for this job, but I did not think to do that. But anyways, this injector driver is just 3 bolts. There's 2 on the top, 1 on the bottom. Eventually it'll come off. You can just push it back towards the battery. You'll have full access to the spark plugs. Just reinstall that, and you're pretty much done for this car. So that's pretty much going to wrap up how to change the spark plugs on any flat cylinder engine, more specifically Subarus, and even more specifically the Subaru BRZ. If you are doing this and you are struggling with it, or you don't really understand what exactly needs to be done, my best advice would be to go back and watch the animation a few times. I've broken this video up into chapters where each section can be seen at the bar at the bottom of the video. If you go back and scroll through, there should be one titled animation, and that will show you exactly how to do it. If you watched it a few times, it should be a lot easier to understand. The camera shots that I was able to get of myself actually doing it on this car don't do a whole lot, as there's so little space and it's very difficult to see down in that crevice. So the animation will be the most beneficial to you. Furthermore, pretty much the entire reason I am doing this is because a shop will charge you anywhere between $1,000 and $1,500, which is quite a lot of money for a job that took me roughly 2 to 3 hours. So in that case, I was saving roughly around $500 an hour, so it's definitely worth doing. If you've never wrenched on a car before, it might be a bit of a tall task, but if you have any sort of mechanical experience whatsoever, this should be completely manageable, especially with the strategy that me and a lot of other people have been using, and that was displayed in this video. So with that being said, if you found this video helpful or just enjoyed it in general, I would really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be releasing a lot more videos like this, and it would help the channel out a lot. So thank you for watching, and have a good day.